Well, if you are in your 20s and 30s, how should you invest? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for the Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, understanding and learning about investments is critical to long-term success. Today we have as our special guest author Dr. Joe Duarte, author of the Everything Guide to Investing in Your 20s and 30s. Dr. Duarte, welcome to Prudent Money.
Well, please just call me Joe, and thank you for asking me to be here.
Absolutely, Joe. You're a practicing MD, which of course takes a huge amount of time. How did you transition into the world of investments? Because you have quite a background in both.
Well, the truth is I've recently retired, so now all my time is
Okay.
With investing and writing. That's not something that's just something that recently happened. So, it all started when I was a resident. Way back in the late 80s, I had lots of people were investing at the time. I didn't have any money to my name, but I learned by watching and listening to them. And of course, the stock market crashed in 1987, and that got everybody's attention. And that sort of triggered me into wanting to learn more about investing.
What's interesting to me is you're on your third edition of a great book here. And, how much has the advice and environment of investing changed over the years that you'd be already on your third edition?
Well, everything is different now. In the old days, you used to have a job and you used to save your money and everything would work out. And now we've had pandemics and, geopolitical strives and
right.
elections. And, everything's up in the air. And a lot of people have ended up investing for part of their regular income as well as their building their long-term wealth. And that's what this book is focused on, helping people to get organized to do all those things.
Joe, it is a different environment. That I will agree with you on in a big way. Things have changed for sure. Well, let's start with long-term wealth building. Why is it crucial to start that process of investing as early as possible?
Well, time is on your side. It's a cliche, but it's true. If you're 25 years old and you got 40 years, then you can make some mistakes early on as you learn your craft. And over time, things should work out a whole lot better than if you start when you're 55 and hope that you can sprint toward the finish line.
We'll talk a little bit about the power of compound interest. I always find that this gets people's attention.
Well, it's just basically your money works for you. You have $100 and you add $100 every month and you gain some interest and you make some good investments, and that $100 grows, not just because you put another $100 every month, but because the $100 is working for you. And, over time, the more you put in and the better your investment results will be. So it's a pretty simple thing, and that's why over 40, 50 years, it tends to work out a whole lot better than over short periods of time.
Well, of course, it is important that you learn the basics, and that's one of the things I love about the book is that it goes over the basics. Talk about the differences between stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and I'll even throw maybe ETFs in there.
Well, stocks are basically pieces of a company, and you're buying into the company and the management's vision and their ability to execute, and then of course it translates into earnings and revenues and those sorts of things. Bonds, you're basically loaning a corporation or a government money, and the returns tend to be smaller, and sometimes they're safer, sometimes they're not. That's one of the fallacies about bonds. You have to watch them very carefully, just like you would watch stocks. ETFs, on the other hand, are basically like mutual funds, except you can trade them like stocks. Mutual fund, you buy and sell it after the market closes, and no matter what happens during the day, you have no choice. But an ETF is essentially like a mutual fund because it's a portfolio of stocks or bonds or whatever, and they trade like stocks. So if you have a brokerage account, you can get in and out of the ETFs during the day. I think each component can play an important role in a balanced portfolio, but I'm not a big proponent of necessarily having 60% of your money in stocks all the time and 40% of your money in bonds. I don't think there's a whole lot wrong with that, but I'm more of I like to be a little bit more active with my own investments, and I try to coach people to work towards that.
Well, there's a lot of talk of volatility. If you turn CNBC on, they talk a lot about that. What is a good working definition of volatility? Because I think that people hear that and they really don't understand what that means.
Well, volatility is just the speed basically with which prices change, and the magnitude. If you have, for example, the Dow Jones Industrial Average goes down 1,000 points in a day and comes back 800 points the next day, as we've seen over the last few months, those are periods of high volatility. And, the opposite is true. You have a few days where not a whole lot happens. Those are periods of low volatility. And, of course, there are many ways to approach that. But in the current environment, you have to appreciate the fact that there's going to be some periods of volatility, and you have to be able to withstand that, especially for your long-term investment plan.
Well, how can diversification reduce the volatility in your investments?
Well, the first step that I always tell people is, number one, pay off your debt.
Yes.
That's the key. And then, have a good budget and maximize your long-term investment plan. So if you work and you have a 401k plan, max it out and see if you can get your employer to add money to it. Once you get that, if you've got any money left over, then you can start exploring other things. Can you get some short-term income through maybe some short-term trading opportunities? You can learn to do that. Do you want to become a day trader? You can certainly do that, although that's not for everyone. But the most important thing is to max out that 401k plan or that IRA. If you're self-employed, I always like to bring this up. A SEP IRA is your best friend. Because you can max out that investment plan, and it's almost as good as a 401k plan in the amount you can put in.
The book is called The Everything Guide to Investing in Your 20s and 30s. And I want to stress the fact that this is everything that you can imagine and that you need to know when it comes to investing. Probably, Joe, one of the biggest debatable issues in the industry is the pros and cons of active versus passive investing. I kind of come from the standpoint, which one's better? I said they both are. I mean, they both have their place, their position. Talk a little bit about this, what I think is an important topic.
Well, you're talking apples and oranges. The first thing you want to do is maximize that 401k plan and make sure that it's a steady grower and stick with your plan for that. If you're putting in $100 a month or $300 a month, and just do that time in and month out. Okay, that's a separate thing. Now, if you're looking to perhaps make $300, $400, $500 a month to pay off some bills, or to have some extra money for travel, that sort of thing, that's when you try and hone your skills for shorter term trading. And I'm not a big proponent of day trading for everyone. I think some people are temperamentally disposed to that, while other people are not. That's why I cover all of those steps separately in the book, and always tell people, this may or may not be for you. And I'm a big proponent of practice trading, on paper.
Right.
If you think you want to day trade, okay, before you start, then by all means, practice some trades on paper. If you're not very good at it, then maybe you ought to rethink that.
But and I know that you've got a long history of investing and trading. One of the things that people need to understand is that if you could learn 3 to 4 different indicators that are telling you everything looks like it's turning around or everything looks like it's going down, I mean, even that would help tremendously.
Well, there's a myriad of indicators, and I'm always surprised by how little people are, know about them or are even willing to learn. They're more than happy to roll the dice and see what happens instead of being prepared. Many of my books that I've written, and I've been blessed to have written many books. At their core is the understanding of technical analysis.
Yes.
Which is, as you well know, is all about indicators. I always say, if you're going to have heart surgery, you don't want to go to the car mechanic to do it. So
right.
So if you're gonna be a more active trader, then you ought to prepare to be one.
If there was one lesson that I needed in my 20s, it was how to live within my means, because that money for saving is not going to be around if you're not intentional about the process of investing. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, my first job as an intern way back in the late 80s, my paycheck was $10,000 a year. And based on that, I learned how to live within my means. I learned how to budget, and thankfully my wife, who was a nurse, made a little bit more money than me, but we always scrimped, we always planned, and we always budgeted. And I think that's really the first step, which is one of the first things I cover in the book. It's not something, investing and building long-term wealth and all the potential side trips. It's not something you're going to learn in a couple of weeks. It's something that you really have to be prepared to take some time to develop. But over time, as I write in the book, it can be done. And to me, it's kind of sad that in our education system we don't spend more time on this kind of thing. So.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you on that. It is a shame, and it's interesting to me is that you go through all this schooling, and then they let you go. You graduate either college or graduate high school. And now everybody expects you to know how to handle probably the most difficult, emotional, toxic thing you'll ever put your hands on, and that's money. And it just doesn't make any sense at all. What are some strategies that you can implement to increase your savings rate for investment purposes?
One of the things that I think is worth trying once you've got some extra money and your debt is paid off and that sort of thing is perhaps some short-term trading using ETFs. You get familiar.
Yes.
You get familiar with one or two or three of them, maybe an index ETF, for the S&P 500 or whatever, and you start figuring out, when it's likely to go up or when it's likely to go down, and you can do that. You can do that, as you well know, by learning how to use indicators and so on and so forth. And one of the things I say is you set a target. You know what? This trade, no matter what happens, when I make $100, I'm out because that's my goal. And this trade isn't going well for me. I'm down $50. I'm out. And if you accomplish that in 3 hours, you're great. If it takes you 3 or 4 days, that's great. Set a goal for something. I'm going to pay my car off this month by trading ETFs. Something along those lines. And then, paper trade it, practice, and eventually, if you're built for that sort of thing, you can start doing that.
Once again, we're talking to Joe about his book, The Everything Guide to Investing in Your 20s and 30s. One of the things that I see people in the industry not talk enough about and not put enough emphasis on, they want you to jump straight to long-term investing once you get out of school, and that's the establishment of an emergency fund. Talk about the absolute importance of having that goal reached and that goal funded.
Well, that should be one of your first steps. Okay, I've paid off all my debt, and I'm going to have X amount of money available in case I lose my job, or in case I have an accident, or something extraordinary happens. And you can fund that through any type of saving. For example, I paid off this credit card, and now that $200 I was putting forward to that. I'm going to go ahead and put that in the bank or a money market fund, and I'm not going to touch it because that's my emergency fund. And there is no substitute for having that. I certainly have one, and I hope as many people as possible can certainly do that.
Joe, I see a lot of conflict around the subject of risk. 20s and 30-year-olds are told to be as risky as you want to because a good percentage of them, because they've got all this time on their hands. But when you look at it, is that there's a good percentage of them that are also very risk averse. What would your advice be to someone with that risk conflict where the industry's saying be aggressive, and the individual saying, but I don't want to be that aggressive?
Well, you certainly don't have to be. As I write in the book, if you're the kind of person that doesn't like to go out in the rain, even if you have an umbrella, then you're not someone that should be trading options. I mean, it's just
sure.
Know your risk profile. And now if you're if you like mountain climbing and that sort of thing, you should always tailor your investment to your personality, but at the same time, always prepare yourself because you can be foolhardy. There is no substitute for learning the craft of investing before you jump in. People think that they can just, like I say, roll the dice. It doesn't work that way. You really should put in some time and read a book such as mine or other books and practice before you go ahead and start doing, especially some of the riskier things.
Let's talk a little bit more about risk tolerance. How do you go about get a kind of a baseline for what your risk tolerance is with investments?
Well, from personal experience, the first thing I ever did was to buy a short duration bond fund. There was nothing in that bond fund that was less than 2 years of greater than 2 years maturity, and it paid out a modest dividend, but it didn't really go anywhere. But I got in the habit of putting a little bit of money in there, and I started reading all the books I can get my hands on, and over time, I used to watch financial television all the time, and I got to recognize who these guys were that actually knew what they were talking about. And, over the next 10 or 15 years, I started evolving, from trading or from owning mutual funds. I started trading stocks, and eventually I evolved into options, and I've been at this for almost 40 years, and now I can trade just about anything. But I don't. I don't trade futures because that drives me crazy. So you have to know your limits. And I think what people learn unfortunately, you're going to learn the hard way what you should and shouldn't do.
Yeah, I think that is a great, very great point. And even though you could do it, doesn't mean you should do it because it's not a match with your personality for risk. I think that's a great point to be making. What are the benefits? And let me say this before I ask the question. One thing that I really do like about the book is that there are investment strategies, things that you can implement that are not difficult to do. Something as simple as dollar cost averaging. I mean, how does that mitigate investment risk?
Well, dollar cost averaging is perfect for your 401k. You know, sometimes if you put in $300 a month, for example, sometimes you're going to buy shares of your mutual fund or the investments in that 401k at a higher price than other. And over time you're building the number of shares. And what happens is that you have a soft period, so you bought more shares. And then when the market takes off, the larger number of shares multiplies your gains. So over time, you're able to nibble, for lack of a better word, at the market, and that's where the compounding comes in too. If you bought 100 shares at $10 one month, and you bought another 100 shares at $8 the next month, but the price goes up to 12, your returns are much more impressive because you were able to add to the number of shares you had.
Joe, how should your investment strategy evolve as you transition from your 20s to your 30s? And what should anything you should be doing differently as you start to get older?
Get better at what you're doing is the only advice I can give someone. Find out what you're good at and keep doing it. And as you build capital, then you can start exploring other avenues, to build long-term income, such as real estate. And you can do real estate, through the stock market, buying real estate investment trusts, or you can buy home builder stocks, or you can go in with a group of friends and buy a rental property. As you get a little bit older and you have more money, then you can start to diversify your holdings. But always, take care of that 401k plan, and look for other areas of income, especially if you're good at that sort of thing, like shorter term trading and so on and so forth. Over time, ideally, investing can become a full-time job. You're 50 years old, you've had enough of working at the office, you've got a nice nest egg, you've got a couple of rental properties, and you're able to make a couple $100 here and there with some short-term trading. Why go to work? You've got
sure.
You've got what you need, and just build it.
Joe, I got about a minute left, and I want to get your take on how you feel about cryptocurrencies.
Cryptos are fine if you're willing to become a technical analyst. In other words, if you're not going to look at price charts and learn about indicators, unless you are a very patient person and are willing to hold on to the things, you're going to be highly disappointed, because crypto is a world unto its own.
Very well put. The name of the book is The Everything Guide to Investing in Your 20s and 30s, packed with just great information. Joe, good luck. Congratulations on your book. Let me say that, on the 3rd edition, and good luck to you.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. One of the things I like about the book is that it touches on a little bit of everything. And I think that's important, that what you read is not just so one-sided, that you get a balanced approach and a balanced investment strategy overall is really the only way to go. And he covers real estate and alternative investments, retirement and tax planning, which we didn't even get to, but a lot of great information. The Everything Guide to Investing in Your 20s and 30s. Well, this is Bob Brooks. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.